All right, Arian, good day, sir. Thursday, October 27th. I can't believe we're in month 10 already
Yeah,
of 2022. Crazy
another month
stuff.
down.
Today on our lineup for our monthly support call, we got a couple awesome topics, but we're going to kick it off with topic that we actually wrote on this week on our newsletter. For those of you guys that didn't get our newsletter or didn't care to check it on out, I'll give you a quick screen share. This is it right here. Via news. Make sure that you guys subscribe if you're not, and if you aren't subscribed up, let us know. We'll click a couple buttons on your account, make sure that you're getting it. But headline here: your shoes are destroying your feet. I wrote on this a little bit in detail that we'll touch on a little bit more here. Oh, Coach Newland, congrats on baby Titus. But we'll dig into a little bit more of how we believe shoes are kind of counterproductive to the way that our feet are created, and how modern day shoes potentially and likely are harming us by the overuse and overwear of them. So I guess we'll start off with Arian. What do you think about what are your thoughts on shoes in general?
I think that they are.
Seems that Coach Arian is having some technical difficulties. So till he returns, we'll start on shoes in general. So, yep, you're open now. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a necessity for shoes. Again, I'm not a complete. I don't think any of us are like shoes have serve no purpose in a modern or health of the foot. But at the same time, I do feel like there's been a lot of interesting direction that has popped up very recently. I know a lot of the people that we follow in the fitness sphere that I've seen have recently adapted a type of barefoot shoe. I knew that was a big push for some of the more functional training. It's a really simple idea, right? Like if you think about the dexterity that the feet have and everything that goes into it, like if you were jamming your hands into something that was wedging them together like this, or even more so like this, that at some point in time that there might be some type of deformity of the bone structures and whatnot. But when you look at bunions and foot problems and collapsed arches, and then that results in knee pain and all of the other elements of it. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where like it's a simple place to look if you run or in like more formal shoes on a regular basis. And it's just one of those places that you're taking a stab at the best tools in your toolkit, like having a little bit more connection with either barefoot training or just a barefoot style shoe might not be a bad option to peruse.
Yeah, you make a really good point. I think the headline there is shoes are, the creation of shoes was essentially to protect our feet from harm. But I think what the evolution of shoes have done is they've inflicted more harm to our feet and our overall performance and the things that we care to do than not. And I think we've grown into a societal culture where being barefoot or being more minimalist is like frowned upon. No shoes, no service, but also just way too much shoe wearing in general. People wearing, and this is obviously to the individual's preference, but people wearing shoes indoors and people wearing shoes in the side of their house is what I meant there. And just wearing shoes for everything, or like needing shoes to just walk on your grass, or hey, make sure that you put your shoes on if you're going for a casual walk or stroll to the mailbox on a nice, smooth, concreted pathway. I think we've almost embodied this like fear of we need shoes for everything that we're doing. But I think what we're not doing is we're not necessarily questioning the creation of shoes and if these shoe companies have our best interest in mind, which I don't think is obviously the case with shoe creations and whatnot. But there's a lot of good companies out there. I would say probably fewer than most. There's a few good companies out there that are actually taking into account the creation of our foot and how we can support the creation of our foot, the strength and support and stability of our foot, and not necessarily do harm. And we could talk about a handful of different companies out there they're doing some really good stuff. But ultimately, what I wrote on this past week regarding shoes in general was pretty much 4 big reasons why we believe modern day shoes are wrecking our feet. And those 4 reasons that I went into grave detail on that we can overview here is when we look at the formation of the shoe, the front toe box of the shoe is far too narrow. And when you think about even things as excessive as like high heels or like, ballet shoes or just like cleats in general, they're really cramming our foot into this hole that is, this structure that is not conducive for how our toes and how our feet are created. If you think about like call it an untainted foot, look at the foot of like a child or a baby or a newborn, or even like a kind of like a youthful child. Like the toes are spread and the foot is relatively wide. Like, why would we put that into something that's going to just cram these feet and cram these toes together? And so that's a big thing that's a big point of when you look at your shoes and your commonplace shoes today, we have this far too narrow toe box. So if we're looking for shoes that are going to be conducive to the health of our foot, we want to look for a shoe that has a little bit wider toe box. And I can drop you guys a quick screen share here since I have it up and show you something like where is it? Nope, that's not it. 5 fingers, this shoe. Okay, this is a Vivo barefoot. Talk about some other components about it, but if you look at the bottom of the shoe, right here towards the toes, we've got a wide toe box, and that's going to allow the toes to maintain their normal form, function, mobility, keep space between the toes, and also give space for the forefoot. So that's a big point of how modern day shoes aren't being conducive for the health of our foot. The second thing that we're looking at is far too much support. When we look at just like, running shoes, let's take a running shoe for an example, right? We have far too big of a sole underneath the foot and the ground. That's pretty much going to allow us to do things like take on massive loads of volume when it comes to running. I don't actually believe in that we are conducive to run long distances, especially with the mechanics that we build. And oftentimes these shoes are the culprit to leading to poor running mechanics. And so when we're looking at the whole concept of a shoe in general, protect our foot from harm, right? The level of support that they're putting into these shoes these days is almost desensitizing our foot and providing us far too much support. When I say desensitizing the foot, it's taking away the feeling, sensations of our foot, but it's also taking away the strength and the natural support that we have through our foot. So we've got too narrow of a toe box. We have way too much support within our shoes. All right. And then we also have too large of a heel to toe drop. And so when you think of like the back, heel to toe just means obviously from the back of the foot to the forefoot, we've got far too big of a drop. You think about high heel, that's going to be almost the most drastic drop from heel to toe. But if you think of the average heel to toe drop on a regular shoe, we're looking at like 10 to 20 millimeters. And sometimes when you think about millimeters, you don't think that that's a lot, but when you think about the actual foot and how our foot connects to the ground, we have a 0 millimeter drop from heel to toe. And so if we're constantly putting our feet into shoes that's pushing our heel up and our forefoot down, it's going to have some deleterious effects to our foot health, but also our Achilles health and upstream when it looks at tendon health, muscular health, knee, hip, joint, back pain, things like that. The last point too is shoes ruin the functionality of your feet. So if you think about your feet to your body are almost like roots are to a tree. They create your foundation. When we have this massive heel to toe drop, we have all of this cushion and support as if we're like walking on, I like to call it walking on clouds or walking on a Tempur-Pedic. You start losing the functionality of your toes to be toes and your foot to be a foot and your arch to be an arch. And, you know, when you think about our feet are supposed to be our foundation. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be force absorbers, and they're supposed to essentially be the roots to our tree. But if we are separating them from the earth with all of this additional cushion or orthotics or elevated heel to toe drop or whatnot, we're going to actually lose the strength and the coordination, the balance, the mobility, the agility of our foot. And so really, when it comes down to it, like, the modern day shoe is very, very problematic if we're looking at healthy feet, strong feet, capable feet. And if we don't have healthy feet, strong feet, capable feet, we're not going to have strong musculature, tendons, and joints upstream, because everything affects everything. And if the roots or the foundation of your structure is not strong, capable, then it's gonna lead to issues upstream. Um, what are your thoughts on those 4 points there? Do you have anything else that you think that you can add?
Yeah, I think one of the big probably root causes for this too is the like fashion over function problem. And so like just looking at like probably, you know, design wise, what tends to, at least for maybe not performance like athletic wear, but more like fashionable wear, you see a lot of like pointed toes, especially when you look at like female heels, male dress shoes, just things that force the toes into a very pointed, like not designed to. Because again, Asia hit some really good points. But like if you think about it, if you're walking around with your shoes off, like your feet spread. Like so, if you take the look of your general foot and then think about like everything spreading by, you know, at least a couple millimeters, maybe even potentially up to, you know, a centimeter in width from widest point, then you put that into a toe box that doesn't allow for that. Like there's no wonder that like your feet hurt all the time, or your ankles ache, or your calves hurt, or anything, especially for people who wear it in a big on a regular basis. I think the cool thing is, because of the culture that we built at, you know, at B Gym, like there's not, I wouldn't say that there's a ton of disagreement with, you know, the barefoot culture or just starting to pay attention to it. But I think a lot of it comes back down to just being mindful that like everybody's feet are shaped differently. Like if you look at your feet compared to my feet, compared to, you know, anybody's feet, even that Vibram shoe, like there are certain brands that we know that like, oh, I can't wear that brand because it's so narrow here and I have a really wide foot. So it's just spending a little time, like if you're going to get, you know, especially something that you're going to be athletic in, um, to spend a little time to just really find the one that actually fits you right. I think it's, you know, similar to bed or similar to, you know, anything that you're going to be, you know, wearing for long term. Like you don't just buy it and try it and then like, hey, that's good enough. All this is clearly like rubbing the sides of my feet, or, you know, but it's super cute, is not a great reason to keep something. And so like you put a really good descriptive of like breaking down the function of the foot, like the analogy, or I guess the idea of like, you know, running. I've heard kind of the opposite. I've heard that we have evolved to run. Like if you think about like anthropologically, like way back in time, I think, you know, it's some of the anecdotal things I've heard was people used to literally run down their deer, like chase after them until they passed. And it was one of those things where it was like that was one of our best hunting tools. But like thinking about, you know, prehistoric man running, like the most he would have had on the bottom of his feet is maybe a little bit of leather, maybe a little bit of animal hide. So there's no like giant Nike cushion. And so when you think about, you know, kind of going back into how they destroy the function of the foot, like you're taking a problem, which is heel striking, which is most of the shoe designs that are out there, that is creating that pillow soft absorption of that impact of running on your heel. And instead of saying, hey, let's fix your running form, it's let's slide a gigantic marshmallow under your heel so that you can do it 1,000 times. And it's less painful, or it's less friction. But, you know, there's no wonder that runners typically have bad knees or bad hips or bad backs. And so it may not be solving the problem, you know, it may be solving the immediate problem, but it might be lending to a much bigger problem down the way. And so those are the things that, like, if you haven't gone down the pathway that, again, you know, like at least explored a couple brands. I know that, like, particularly for me, having gotten a brand like Noble, something that has a much wider toe box, like a much wider kind of mid step, like it's infinitely more comfortable. And I could wear those loose or tied. I could run, I could jump, I could do anything like that. That feels really good. When I train barefoot, I know that there's a handful of movements that like I specifically can't do barefoot just because it tears up the skin on my toes, no matter how few or how many. And, you know, lunges, kind of burpees, anything that takes that toe through kind of that full range of motion, that tends to just shear the skin really bad. And so for me, it's just being smart kind of around my training and knowing like, hey, when I need to have a pair of shoes, like what type of shoes I want to have access to, and things from there.
Yeah, you hit on some good points that I think we could dive into a little bit more in detail. Like running long distances, and how instead of fixing the problem of running mechanics, you know, we've just created shoes to allow for more padding beneath the foot to just take on more force and almost like facilitate these poor mechanics. And like, I think all of this is important to understand. And what we'll dive into too, which I think is a really good topic, is like, well, you know, what do I do? Do I go barefoot, or do I go and rip the Band-Aid and buy a pair of minimalist shoes, or do I kind of have this stair-step process? And this is stuff that we've dealt with at the gym too, that I think is important to continue to talk on and write about and great conversation around too. But it's like, okay, we've addressed the issues with modern shoe wear, and I think Arian hit the nail on the head when it comes down to like, we're uninformed as a consumer base. What we do is we look to buy shoes out of what's trendy and what's fashionable versus how it's going to affect the function of our feet and how it's going to affect our health and our performance. And, you know, Arian's 100% correct, where it's like things happen upstream and downstream. So it's like, if I do have pain in my back or my hip or my knee or my shoulder, sometimes it's not actually coming from my back or my knee or my hip or my shoulder. It's sometimes coming down the stream or up the stream. You know, there's a famous line by Gray Cook, who created the functional movement screen, where it's like, if you're missing strength or mobility in a joint, like that joint's having to pull from the surrounding joints. So that might be above it or below it. And so we have to kind of think about this in the same lens, where it's like, how are the things that I'm doing or wearing or keeping in a consistent exposure to, in this sense, like wearing crappy shoes or wearing poor shoes and then trying to go and run 400-meter repeats, or trying to do box jumps or step ups, or trying to do squats with them, and how are they affecting my quality of my movement, but my overall quality of my training session, and just like the quality of my joint health and my tissue integrity. And so, you know, I think I guess we could talk about, you know, if someone is watching this, so they're like, okay, cool, like I got crappy shoes, so like, and I want to do something about this, whether it's I want to get a new pair of shoes, or, you know, okay, I'm going to have to deal with my crappy shoes. What kind of solutions do I have? And your recommendation, Arian, like, where should people start? Like, let's say that all they own is a pair of, you know, Asics that they purchased at the nearest Sam's Club for $20. And at the end of the day, like, the cheapest shoes are definitely not the best shoes, but that's all they have access to. Where can they start if they wanted to not buy or invest in an additional pair of shoes, or maybe they did want to invest in a better pair of shoes?
Yeah, I think step one is just kind of like paying attention to the shoes that you have currently and how like your feet feel after wearing them. Like if it's like, man, I can't wait to take these off, or I'm getting
We lost them again. When he comes back in, I'll add him on in. A few things that I would suggest is, all right, go ahead.
I'm back. Yeah. So did you get any of that, or?
No, we missed it. Go ahead, repeat.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, in terms of like kind of starting strategies, I think it's maybe step one is to evaluate what you have. And so a lot of times that means simply as like, hey, when I wear my shoes for long periods of time, do I have like big blisters on my pinky toe or on my big toe or on the bottoms and the soles of my feet, or am I getting, you know, bloody cuts on the heel cord? Like these are just pretty good indications that something is rubbing or wearing in a way that it's not.
Aaron's got some solid connection today. I think what the point. All right, go ahead, Aaron. And if
No, go ahead, because I feel like I keep coming in and out.
Yeah. So the points that I was going to make is, let's say that you have a crappy pair of shoes, which is likely everybody. 99% of the shoe brands out there are going to have a narrow toe box. They're going to give you way too much support. They're going to have a massive heel to toe drop, are likely going to be restrictive and constrictive in different areas. And so, what Arian was saying is pay attention to what you currently have. Like, are your shoes fitting your feet? Are they comfortable? Or are they, cramming what I like to call a round peg into, a square peg into a round hole? It's putting something where it doesn't necessarily fit, and it's likely the shoes that you have. But my recommendations are, do what you can do with what you've got. Wear your shoes, but wear them when you need them. And so a lot of you guys are training in our GPP classes, and it's like, hey, it's probably good to wear those shoes when you are running, as long as you don't have any pain and discomfort when you're running. It's likely good to wear those shoes when you're doing things that require you to jump or run or sprint or move laterally or be, I guess, plyometric on your feet, right? Jumping jacks, jumping rope, box jumps, box ups, burpees, stuff like that. Like, that's when you want protection for your feet. Because like what Arian was saying is, like, if we just kick our shoes off and we go barefoot, like, we're going to create blisters. We're going to create, rubbing in areas that these shoes tend to protect our feet from, and it's not comfortable. I mean, the other day I just saw one of our members who was doing burpees barefoot and like had two massive blisters on the bottom of their feet from it. And it's not even like they did a ton of reps. So that's not pleasant. It's not something that you want to do. So that's where it's like, let's have some protection, let's have some support. Or if we're going to kick our feet off, understand where our tolerance is at. And this kind of pulls me into point two, where it's like, I see a lot of folks who come in the doors, they see myself or Coach Arian or Coach Trevor, or they see a lot of clients working out barefoot, and they don't actually understand the time under tension that they've built being barefoot. Like, I've been barefoot since 2014. Like, I do everything barefoot. Like, I mean, oftentimes I forget that I need shoes to go into stores. So I have a lot of training barefoot. I have a lot of walking on different surfaces barefoot. And it's not to say that I won't step on a pebble or a Lego or a rock and it'll still be debilitating pain, but I can do things like burpees and box jumps and run because I've done tons and tons and tons of volume doing it. It's not conducive to say, oh, everybody's doing barefoot training, so I'm just going to kick my shoes off and I'm going to go and run these 400 repeats barefoot. Like, know where your tolerance level is at and build your way into it. And so a good example might be, like, instead of going immediately to barefoot running, maybe you start with, walking barefoot on soft grass or around a smooth concreted pathway around your house. And maybe you start doing that. You're building your tolerance up to walking more distance or spending more time on your feet. And then you eventually get to a point where you're doing some level of walking and running. And then you get to a little bit more running. And then you can start building up your tolerance to say, hey, I'm actually comfortable doing this. Maybe I can start doing this when it comes to my training, working out. But you understand that there's some level of progression here instead of what we like to call the rip the Band-Aid method, which isn't always the best method. Sometimes it could serve its purpose, but it isn't always the best method. And it's certainly not a great method when it comes to, doing vigorous training with shoes and without shoes, especially with the context of your training history and background and maybe previous injury and background. If we're known to having joint issues or pain in our feet or back pain or stuff like this, it's definitely not going to be conducive to just kick off our shoes and start doing everything barefoot. But those would be my suggestions: is understand where your tolerance load is at and spend more time barefoot, on soft surfaces. That means anytime that you're in your house, make sure that you're barefoot. You don't have shoes, go on walks with your family on smooth concrete pathways, spend more time barefoot and doing things like in your garden or in your grass, playing with your kids, and build up a tolerance to where you are only barefoot and you're cognizant of being barefoot during these times, and like your feet will absolutely reward you. And when you look at a gym space, a great time to be barefoot is anytime we're doing stationary work, anytime that we're doing I call it ballistic work or plyometric work, right? We're jumping or we're having to move our feet vigorously or aggressively. Like, that's a good time to have shoes on, or at least have some variation of a shoe on. We could talk about minimalist shoes and stuff like that, but know where your tolerance levels are at and build those tolerance levels up so that eventually you can start moving away from cruddy shoes for the most part.
Yeah, that's great. I think you hit the nail on the head kind of across the board. I think, like you said, I think the slow adaptation of moving your way away from, the necessity of having to have a shoe or having to have a specific type of shoe for, each event, can make you a little bit more well-rounded. Especially, I mean, most of us aren't training for something specific. We don't have like an Olympic lifting focus, or we don't have like, a sprinting focus. A lot of times we're just training for, being generally better at all things that come up for life. And so for that matter, like, we're just looking for something simple. I mean, I can remember back to when kind of the minimalistic movement started, and before a lot of these shoe options existed, like, everybody immediately went to like skateboard type shoes. So it was like Vans and like Converse and things that were extremely flat, had no drop off. I had no, Asia called it the drop off, but the heel being elevated relative to the foot, and much wider toe box. And people were getting great results from that. I still see from time to time a decent amount of people kind of using that as their like deadlifting shoe or minimalistic type shoe. I mean, that's a great starting point. I mean, even less than that would be essentially barefoot. But then I also remember, like, in that same time, like Nike and some of the other running type shoes were pushing out how much air could they stick under your heel, right? It's the same concept with, I think, where for a lot of people who experience foot pain or back pain or want to run and they're looking for a solution, a lot of times they think that the problem is the shoe that they're wearing and not the style of running. So they're looking at like orthotics or something that's a custom mold that allows them to essentially walk like this. If I want to walk like this, instead of saying, hey, why don't you just stand up straight? They're like, hey, let me stick something underneath here so that you can walk like this more effectively. It's like, that might not be the best ultimate option long term, especially when you think about how much impact that you're creating or distance that you're putting or mileage. I mean, if every step you run is essentially a rep, that's theoretically a lot of repetitions. And so, yeah, I think the nail on the head takeaway piece from this is having options, giving yourself the ability to play with it. You brought up a great point with stationary work. I would say almost like the warm up component. Like, we do a general warm up that involves usually some type of very gentle, low ballistic, but just, designed to get our core temperature movement up, that most likely wouldn't require shoes. Like, that's a great time to not be wearing shoes. If you don't like having the feeling of, your foot on the ground, just wear your socks, right? Just kick your shoes off and wear your socks, and have your shoes if you want to. But take a look at it. I think a lot of this goes back down to kind of preparedness. But if you take a look at it and there's no running, there's no jumping, everything is kind of, overhead or minimally jumping. It's like, today I probably don't need shoes, right? I'll just keep them on the sideline if I want them. But at the end of the day, like, I'm gonna experience what this feels like kind of standing. The first day it feels weird, but I also think it feels weird because socially it feels weird to not have your shoes, because like, feet are one of those things that are unlike hand. If you had a mitten on your hand at all times that literally like covered all of your fingers and nobody ever saw your hands, the one time they saw them, like, yeah, that would be like, it would be strange. Same thing with feet. Most people don't typically have their feet exposed, right? And again, I always make my joke about, people having holes in their socks and whatnot, but like, pay attention to like little things. Like, we were designed to move. If you're wearing your shoes in your house, like, have to ask you kind of why. Like, what's the point of that? Like, shoes are essentially coverings to not traffic dirt into certain places, or to protect us from, inclement, surfaces if we're walking on stuff that potentially is sharp or hot or something else. And then when you get home, which should be a comfortable environment, like, you shouldn't have to have a shoe. Um, and I think from that standpoint, like, we've done a pretty good job talking. I'm sure in your inside of the article, there was some recommendations for some types of shoes. I think the other one to look at is your comfort level shoes. So thinking about shoes that you probably shouldn't be wearing on a regular basis, even when you aren't training. So like thong flip-flops, something that's forcing and pinching those toes together, going through a step that you're having to hold, as opposed to kind of more of the like the slide type shoe. Especially for those who, are walking, like beachish or out and about for good distances, like that can be extremely problematic. It's like, hey, I got my gym footwear kind of handled. Oh yeah, I have to wear heels from time to time, but my alternative to that is a thong flip flop. Like, that should be another kind of big red flag. But if you look at your feet and you have bunions, or if you have, big calluses or big blisters or discomfort in certain areas, I think it's, it's probably not a bad idea to take a couple steps back and kind of ask, like, why? Like, have I always had bunions, or has this been something that has developed over time? Have I always had calluses here, or has this been something that's developed over time? And then, we can kind of think through how best to solve that. But that's always one of those things where it's like, it might not just be like genetically how your foot is built. It might be what you're putting it on every single day. It might not be the 1 hour you're at the gym and this running shoe. It might be this gigantic loafer with a pointed toe that you wear 8 hours a day at your job, right? And those are the things that I would say, maybe start looking at all of the options that you have.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the societal view on just discomfort of being barefoot. If you think about any and all reasons why we might be like ashamed or embarrassed to be barefoot, it's likely because of the shoes that we wear. Like if you think about, and this is just off the top of my head, like why wouldn't I want to be barefoot around someone? Oh, my feet smell. Well, the reason that your feet smell is likely they're encased in a shoe or a sock all day long, which is creating all this like bacteria environment. If you think about it, like a barefoot doesn't really smell bad at all. Like I'm a product of that. My feet probably smell much worse in a shoe than they do barefoot. The other thing to think about too is the like disfigurement of people's feet. Like that's likely created by cramming it into a shoe. And so when we think about the whole reason why people might not necessarily want to be barefoot because of they're ashamed or embarrassed of what their feet look like or what their feet potentially smell like, it's because of a shoe. So you can solve a lot of those problems by removing shoes and spending more time away from shoes, or at least getting the appropriate shoe. And I think it's worthwhile an investment to, get a good pair of shoes that has a minimal sole or has a wide toe box. Sure, these shoes are not cheap, and I think it's because they're the 1%. They're not competing with a lot of other brands for shoes that provide you minimalist sole and a wide toe box. But Arian's right. Like it doesn't have to be crappy shoes or barefoot. Like you don't have to be barefoot at all. You can invest in a really high quality pair of shoes, and I'll show you a couple brands here to close it on up, to where all of the things that you care or desire to do barefoot, but you'd rather not do it barefoot for X, Y, and Z reasons, just get a great quality pair of shoes and allow your feet to like be feet inside of those shoes. And, a lot of the issues that we deal with feet these days is relatively self-inflicted. If we have bunions or we have, crammed toes or hammer toes or whatever, podiatry issues that we have with our feet, oftentimes they're self-inflicted from years and years and countless use of putting our feet into shoes that don't fit our feet. And so if things are self-inflicted, typically we can reverse them. But if you've been spending 40 years in crappy shoes, it's not going to take you 40 months, much less 40 days or 40 hours to recorrect those things. It's going to take you a long amount of time, but it takes just continual effort and energy spent by doing a lot of the things that we had discussed. So to wrap things up, I'll show you guys some cool brands of shoes that can meet all budgets, but follow the I guess the rhythm and routine of widening toe boxes, minimalist sole, and really just kind of doing what a shoe was made to do, which is protect our feet from harm, but also allow our feet to function as feet. So the first one we have here is called Vivo Barefoot. This is going to be more of an expensive shoe, but it's going to have a wide toe box. It's going to have a very minimal sole, and this tends to be a favorite of some of our members. The cool thing about this is they don't just make shoes that you can train in, but if you're somebody who works and needs a boot or needs an all black shoe, like they provide these things. And so whether it's an active shoe or it's a shoe that's needed to be for leisure, just be for work, like this is a great shoe. Definitely more on the expensive end. You're probably going to run closer to the $150 mark for a shoe like this. You have your OG shoe, Vibram's Five Finger. This is probably one of the uglier shoes on the mark, but man, it's a functional shoe. It actually is like a toe shoe. So if you notice, it has spaces for each toe to move in. It has spaces between your feet, and essentially this is like a sock shoe. So it's got a sole on the bottom, but it fits fits your foot like a sock. Definitely not the best look walking around the grocery store and or working out in the gym in one of these, but man, they got some great function behind them. So these are called Vibram's 5 fingers. Looks like it's going to run you somewhere between 125 to 150 as well. Flat sole, protecting the foot. Not necessarily a wide toe box, but just spaces for your toes, spaces between your toes. Great shoe here. Next option is splay. So my son actually has a pair of these. These are really, really cool. They don't make like big sizes. So I was actually interested in getting a pair of these, but they don't make huge sizes. But they have some really cool looks on these. And these would probably be more similar to like a casual shoe, like a Chuck Taylor or a Vans. The issue with Chuck Taylor and Vans is they have a really narrow toe box. With these splays, they have a much wider toe box, as you can tell, but they have a really cool look to them. Flat soles, zero differential from heel to toe, and relatively affordable. I'd say that this is one of the best, most affordable shoe for a lot of things that we talked about. Sure, I think these are kids, but men's shoes I don't think run much more past like $50. They got slip-ons, they got ties, they got some really cool colors, some Velcro strap. So that's splay shoes. And then there's actually a couple brands on Amazon that I've tried on out. Witten is a great option. Wide toe box, minimalist, and it's got a pretty cool look to it. I think they have like over here, they've got some casual looking ones, and then these are great ones that you can work out in. But if you're looking at the price, like $40, this is super affordable. They've got a bunch of different colors. The only thing that I didn't like about this is pretty restrictive in the arch. So I have a pretty high arch in my foot, and this one was even pretty high there. So coming back to the point that Arian made on comfort, like it's got to be comfortable, but also understand, guys, that there's probably a learning curve there for your foot to get used to a shoe that's likely going to fit it appropriately versus one that it's been so used to. So there's probably going to be a learning curve for your foot to get adjusted to the shoe that you buy it for, but obviously there has to be some level of comfort there. So this is called Witten, and you can find this on Amazon. And then the last brand we have here is Zero Shoes. This is one of the more popular ones. Zero's an OG in the industry, $100. So this is going to be moderately priced, but a lot of folks, wide toe box, minimalist, and the cool thing that they do with these shoes too is they like bend them up and like put them in this tiny little space where you can basically fit them in your pocket. And that's really like an appropriate shoe. And that's an appropriate shoe that's really just going to protect your foot from harm, but not necessarily take away the functionality of the foot. So this is more of a moderately priced. As you can tell, they're not, that visually appealing, but they work, and, they allow your foot to be a foot.
And kind of playing in from there.
Yeah. And so it's a great option. So those are pretty much 5 shoe brands that meet the standards of giving your toes space to move, space to breathe, minimizing the heel to toe drop, minimizing the sole to the ground to allow your foot to function as a foot. And we talked about some more affordable options to maybe some more expensive options. Yeah, Coach Brad's also got like I forget
what the barefoot. It's called barefoot.
It's called barefoot. It literally just looks like a gray piece of leather around his foot. Definitely not the most visually appealing, but I think we need to, turn the times to selecting shoes that probably are subtly visually appealing, but more functional for our foot versus ones that are just trendy to be trendy. Don't want to see any of you guys walk around the gym in any Yeezys, okay? No. All right, Aaron, you got anything else? Otherwise, we're wrapping on up.
Yeah, trash your Skechers shape ups up.
Yeah, seriously. We don't want to see any of that. So talked about some really, really good stuff today, guys. We'll drop this, and I'll also drop a link to the newsletter so that you guys read more up on it. It has links to all those shoes that we talked about. We'll be back next month, November. We'll be looks like the 24th, which is probably Thanksgiving. We're likely going to move that one up to the 17th. We'll drop you guys some info around that, but we'll plan for the 17th to be our next monthly support call. I don't even know what number we're on, but we're crushing it. If you guys got any topics or any questions, feel free to send them our way. We love to talk on anything around health, fitness, functionality of feet. Drop it our way and we'll definitely create some conversation around it. Other than that, you guys make it a great rest of your day. Enjoy this gorgeous weather, and we'll see you guys around the gym space.
Yes, sir.